Brian Christopher Broad, born the 29th of September 1957 in Knowle, Bristol in England. What was it like growing up for you?
It was fun. We lived in Bristol, and I went to Colston School in Bristol and had I mean, at the time, I didn't know it was a very good education, but you look back and it was good academically as well as sporting wise, and certainly that's what sowed the seed in me to play sport for a living. Although I really didn't make a decision about that until I was, late teens, early 20s, really. But certainly growing up was great. I had a brother and a sister.
What are their names, please?
My brother was called Michael. Unfortunately, he died at 26, had a massive heart attack and died at 26, which was a real shock to the system.
Then?
I was 24, so we were sort of 18 months apart.
Very close?
Not particularly, but, like brother and sister,
sure.
We'd have our good times and we'd have our bad times. And my sister is 18 months younger than me, and she's alive and well and has 3 kids of her own and is enjoying life as well. So,
Dad Ken and Mum Nancy, what do they do with their time?
Well, my mum is my mum's still going strong. My father is 95, and he is doing remarkably well as well. He was the first one who set me on the path to play cricket, because I remember as real youngsters, we as a family always used to go and watch him play cricket at Stoke Bishop in Bristol every Saturday, and we would go off, and my brother and I and Mum would throw us the ball, and we'd try and hit the ball back, and so we generally play on the boundary's edge while Dad was out there fielding and batting. And then at the end of the game, it was a favoured treat of ours to, on the way home, pick up fish and chips and then take the fish and chips back home to
sounds like a pretty brilliant day, actually, doesn't it?
To eat and then obviously go to bed after that. So that was the summer, Saturday summer.
What do you do for a living, your dad?
He was a builder.
Uh-huh.
His grandfather started up a company called T. Broad and Sons, and his father went into it and he went into it, and my brother was going into it until he died suddenly. But my father sold the business just at the right time, just before the crash in the 80s, and so made a decent amount of money on the selling of the business, and has followed my career throughout, and is obviously now following my son's career throughout. So he's enjoying life.
We'll come on to your son, the Demon Bowler, a little later, if we may. You say you were a late developer, and that answers one of my later questions about why you're not making your first class debut until you're in your 20s. How would you describe your cricket development? You say you didn't make the decision until later on. What were you doing with your teenage life then?
Do you know? I went to Colston's, as I say, and I managed to get scraped through 5 O-levels. And I remember playing a second team game for Gloucestershire.
That makes you a genius by some sports standards, doesn't it?
Maybe. But
you went to St Paul's College in
I did.
In Cheltenham, yeah.
And I was playing a second team game down at Hampshire, Gloucester Seconds versus Hampshire. And I remember I was waiting on one O-level result, and my father phoned me the morning of the second or third day of this match. And he said, "Son, you've got it. You're going to St Paul's College in Cheltenham." And actually, it was a real boost, a real fillip for me, because, my father being and my mother being from that generation, they wanted me to have an education before anything else that comes into
and let's be
one's
fair,
life.
You didn't know that then, but they were right, weren't they?
Well, I don't know, actually, because I didn't finish my education. I did the school, and then I went to St Paul's College, and I did a year on teacher training. And then I changed to a sports management course for a second year. And at the end of the second year, I was offered a cricket contract. Didn't really have to think about it too long. And that was really when I decided that cricket was for me, because I could play a sport that I loved and be paid for it.
In the middle of all this, as a 15-year-old, you become, an unusual illness, I think, let me get it right, osteomyelitis?
Osteomyelitis.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, it's a bone marrow disease, and I had it, funny enough, I had a fantastic GP when I was growing up, and I'd been in and out of hospital quite a bit through my teenage years, and I had a cold, and quite a heavy flu-y type cold. And the doctor came round, and I was lying in bed, and I complained of a soreness in my hip. And he had a look at it, and I don't know what he looked at, what he saw, but he immediately thought that there was something wrong. Maybe it was the symptoms that I was describing. So I was taken into hospital, and I remember my parents telling me afterwards that going into hospital there, they were told to brace themselves that I might not actually make it through. I was that bad.
Wow.
And if I did make it through, then I would never play sport again, because I would always have one leg shorter than the other. So obviously I wasn't told this, and I had 9 weeks in hospital. I had 52 injections of antibiotics, so 26 in each cheek, which
Yeah, that can't have been the most, but you must have had more pleasant experiences in your life than that.
Exactly. But I remember Henry Cooper coming around. There was a friend of his who was in a hospital over Christmas, and he came round to see this chap, and Henry then decided to come round and say hello to everyone in the hospital. And so Henry Cooper comes into our little section and comes up, shakes my hand, and then walks
just
on.
about the most famous sportsman in Britain at that time.
Fantastic!
Yeah.
I mean, it was just wow. This is amazing. And I also discovered, what tongues were for in kissing. If I can go down this road,
I want to.
Christmas is time for nurses to come around and give the patients a little bit of a lift, and all of a sudden I'm this nurse comes up and gives me a kiss, and this tongue is starting to poke through my lips, and it's like, what?
Hang on.
What's all this about?
Heidi High. I mean, that's
15-year-old innocence it was.
That's when the National Health Service was the National Health Service. Would you say, Chris, finally to end this section, bigger boost from the kiss from the nurse or Henry Cooper being in the ward?
I think it's a combination of the two.
Martin Taylor, we've been hearing about Chris's development as a cricketer, was the cricket master at Colston School in Bristol. What must seem like a long, long time ago now. Delighted to say join us on the line now. Hello, Martin.
Hi, Danny. How are you?
I'm very good indeed. Say hello to Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Martin, how are you? Be nice,
I'm
won't
right,
you?
thank you.
Be nice.
Well, I suppose the trade secret here is that I think we've got your number from Chris. So I suppose you're going to be nice, Martin.
He knows I could be very different.
Well, maybe he wouldn't be the man and the cricketer he was if you weren't. Tell us about the teenage broad and his cricketing skills.
Well, Chris was very determined. Everyone talks about Chris and his fiery temperament, fiery demeanour.
He says that's over-exaggerated, and he threatened to hit me if I said it again.
But I mean, most we wouldn't really see that at school. I mean, he was just to be very competitive, very determined. I mean, there was a group of youngsters at Colston's at that time who were very competitive and competitive amongst themselves, and Chris stood very tall amongst them and was a successful cricketer, obviously.
I mean, but no matter how determined and talented a young person is, Martin, they can learn things from their own experience, but they can be taught things as well. How recipient a pupil was he to your coaching?
He was very good. I mean, not just my coaching. I mean, I was a young schoolmaster at the time, and I was in charge of rugby. I just had to control these chaps and keep them on the right tracks. But I mean, we had at Colston's at that time a cricket pro, Reg Sinfield, who played for Gloucestershire and England. Had one Test match at Trent Bridge, which Chris was pretty pleased to go on there afterwards. And I mean, Chris was very good at listening to Reg. I mean, Reg was. I don't know what age he would have been in there, 70s or even 80s. I mean, Reg carried on working here till... And Chris was good at listening. Don't know whether many other people would say that about him, but at that age... At that age, I was always impressed that he had good manners with this is quite an old chap, but he did recognise that... Reg had a lot to offer him, and he listened.
I just remember Reg being in his little kit room, wearing his really, really old Gloucestershire jumper, which just so impressed me. The colours of the Gloucestershire jumper were just, to die for, really. And he was, even when he came out and stood at Square Leg, he was a real fountain of knowledge. And to listen to someone like that who's played county cricket and played international cricket, and maybe that was where you were going, was just an absolute pleasure.
Well, listen, it's been sorry, Martin, you're going to say?
I was just saying about Chris with Reg, because I think Chris had been brought up with cricket around him. I think Chris's mum and dad were very involved at Gloucestershire, and I think Chris was used to listening to old pros. And I mean, old pros do go on, don't they? But
well, we're going to find that out
Well,
very soon.
I hope I don't any longer.
no. Well, that's And the other thing I'd say about Chris is that he's kept in touch with us all, kept in touch with the school. I mean, it's 40 years ago since he was at school, and he's still very much involved in what the old Colstonians are doing. We've got an old Colstonian cricket day here today, and if you hadn't have sneaked in, we might have had him here.
Oh, well, there's always next year, and I don't suppose you'll be playing much cricket in the weather over Britain today anyway. Listen, Martin, it's been a pleasure and enlightening to hear from you. Thank you very much indeed.
Not at all.
Thanks, Martin.
Hope your show goes well. Look forward to see you down at Colston soon, Chris.
Okay, will do.
Yeah, it's Martin Taylor, Chris's cricket master at Colston School. We're trying to give a lot of the credit for your development to somebody else, which I always think is a sign of a pretty good cove. You do eventually join your mentor in wearing that Gloucester. That beautiful coloured Gloucester jumper. You make your debut for the county, a 21-year-old in 1979. What kind of cricket scene? What kind of Gloucester team did you come into?
I remember making my debut at Cambridge, and they dropped Sadiq Mohammed for me.
So Pakistan, a pretty good player.
Yeah, Pakistan opener for a Benson Hedges game. So it's like, whoa, this is an international player, and I'm taking over his role. And it was, listen, I just enjoyed playing, and I didn't really look at the bigger picture, if you like. It was just I was offered the opportunity to go out there and play. Of course I was nervous because Mike Proctor was captain of the team.
Legendary man, of course.
Zahir Abbas was in the side, Pakistan player, and you had Andy Stovall, David Graveney, John Childs, lots of Brian Brain, lots of senior players. And yet here was I being offered a debut, and it was fantastic.
There's something remarkable about this, isn't there? You were able to name the 8 or 9 members of the team that you played in as a youngster, and I was able to recognise most of them. It's not about our ages; it's to do with the stability of county cricket in those days. I must say, nowadays it's hard to follow from one year to another who plays for what county. Or am I just getting a bit scattier?
Funny enough, I had a chat with David Morgan, who was given a role by the ECB to look into county cricket, and the abiding thing that he came up with was that actually it needs a structure, it needs a proper structure. In years gone past, you haven't really known when a county championship match starts, when a T20 starts, when a 50-over, 40-over game starts. And
it's scattergun now, domestic cricket, isn't it?
And he's come back with this plan to actually have certain matches starting on certain days so that the spectators know which days they can go along and watch what type of cricket.
So you play with Gloucester for your first century. I'll just mention that. I think we should mention that. 116 against Hampshire. What's your memories of that day?
116 against Hampshire. That was at Bristol.
Is that right?
I'd got 94 or 96. 96, I think it was, against Warwickshire, the previous match. And in fact, I think it was Northants I got my first 100 against.
Okay.
Peter Willey was playing for them. And I remember scratching around. I'd got 96 the previous innings, and Mike Proctor came up to me when I was caught at cover, and he said, don't try and get to 100 in one shot, try and do it in singles. So I remember on this particular occasion, Peter Willey was bowling, who was, I'm sure, then playing for Northants. Yeah. And he bowled me, I was in the nervous 90s again. I was remembering what Proctor was saying. You've got to run it around. You've got to get the ones and twos. And I remember I was on 98, something like that.
Sure.
And he bowled me an arm ball, and I'd gone back to it, and I thought if I'd missed this, I was in trouble. But I got an inside edge, and it went down past leg stump, and I scampered through for 2.
No fielders there. That's good.
Absolutely. And I remember celebrating, what have you. And my brother was at the game later on, and he and I were sat down having a drink in the bar afterwards. And Peter Willey, current England player at that time, came up and shook my hand. And I said to him, I wasn't really the greatest innings ever. He said, never knock yourself getting 3 figures. 3 figures is a really difficult score to get. Well played. At 100, doesn't matter how you got it.
That was very decent of him.
That was very decent of him.
Absolutely. Yeah. You play at Gloucestershire for 5 years. I don't want to be insulting to your home county. They're never really challenging for honours. I can give you the run of league positions: 10th, 7th, 13th, 15th, 12th. You then go and play for Nottinghamshire. What was behind that?
At the time, pretty much in what you said there, I didn't feel as though they were achieving anything. I remember in the last year I had at Gloucester, Andy Stovall had a really good start to the year, wicketkeeper batsman. They were talking about him in the media as potentially being an England player. And I wasn't aware, someone might have turned up, I wasn't aware of a selector coming down to Bristol to look at Andy Stovall. And that kind of wrangled with me, that actually if you start to put together good performances and a selector doesn't turn up at the ground, then how are you ever going to get selected? So, I kind of had discussions with some friends of mine in the team.
Because it was unusual. People didn't change counties quite so often.
No,
did
that's
they?
right. That's right. And I just thought, well, actually, if I'm going to achieve anything, I've got to move county, and
Why
I've got
did you
to
choose Nottinghamshire?
Well, listen, I went. I had issues with Gloucestershire at the time, behind the scenes, and I inquired of the Professional Cricketers Association, who of the people who have offered me contracts, and I was lucky enough to get, half a dozen counties come in for me. Who of those counties were the best run? And without a shadow of a doubt at that time, Notts was the best run county. And you look at their team, and they had Clive Rice as captain, Derek Randall, Richard Hadley, Mike Hendrick played, Eddie Hemmings played for them, Bruce French and Tim Robinson were
and all getting through to their international sides as well, to England's team.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, for me, it was a no-brainer. You're going to an extremely well-run club. You're going to a test venue, which, take nothing away from Bristol, but you play at a test venue, you get a real feeling of achievement just walking out onto that field. And it was a good place to play. I'd played there and scored runs, so I was very happy.
And your plan worked, because you were hardly at Nottinghamshire for a few weeks, and you're suddenly in the England team.
Well, yes, that was rather by misfortune in that Andy Lloyd was in the Test team at the time, and of course got felled by a Malcolm Marshall bouncer.
Yeah,
and,
when I said you were lucky, I don't suppose being picked for an England team to play against a particular West Indies team qualifies as most people's idea of luck.
I enjoyed fast bowling, so for me it was a dream come true.
And you were great at it, weren't you?
I enjoyed it.
You were a brilliant player of fast bowling.
Yeah.
So what do you remember about your Test debut? I can tell you, you're pretty good. You're at Lords against the great West Indies side in the third Test, yeah?
But I've got a quiz question.
Oh, right.
Who opened the bowling for West Indies on that particular occasion?
Oh, my God. Now
I can tell you if you'd like me to.
I'd like you to, because I'm about to go through 17 pace bowlers. You're going to tell me.
It was Clive Lloyd's cousin, Milton Small.
I wouldn't. If you'd given me a million guesses.
No, there you go. No, he was making his Test debut, and Clive Lloyd felt that it was a good chance to get him on to open the bowling, get the nerves out of the way. So it was Milton Small and Joel Garner. So I tried to stay down Milton Small's end for as long as possible.
Yes, that's fair enough. You're making your debut. You don't need to be getting anywhere near the Garner just yet. Chris, we discussed earlier having gone to Nottinghamshire, and we'll talk very quickly making your debut. But you did establish yourself very quickly as a proper force in the county game. And in 1987, the whole team comes together. I mean, you're always a good team at Nottinghamshire, as you said. In the first year, you were there second, then eighth, then fourth. And 87, you win the county championship. Now, I say this because there will be people listening to our voices, younger people, who will not realise what a huge deal it was to win the county championship back in 1987.
Well,
it was a massive thing.
You had to play well in pretty much most of the games that you played. First class, one days. I mean, we were a top team. We had some fantastic players in our team, and it was expected of us to go out and achieve in virtually every competition we played in.
I should make the point as well. This is before the Premier League, when people like me would buy a newspaper during the summer and see the latest championship news on the back pages of every newspaper. And 5 pages in, it would just be the cricket scores and pictures of people like yourself on one knee knocking it out of the ground. Those were the days, I'm afraid, for cricket.
I don't know which paper you were reading that said I was knocking the ball out of the ground. That didn't happen very often.
No, maybe it was Derek Randall.
I think so.
Tell us about the team that won the championship then.
Well, it was a very, very good team made up of superstars with the likes of Richard Hadley and Mike Hendrick and Clive Rice as captain.
Amazing attack.
And people who were perhaps not the stars. Kevin Saxelby, Kevin Cooper, Mike Bohr, Mick Newell, Paul Johnson, those that didn't go on to play international cricket. But but were so important to our team because, they would come in, they would score their runs and take their wickets at crucial times.
And I would make the point again for the teenagers listening that this was before the leagues were divided into two. It was a tremendous schlep as well. There was an awful lot of cricket played.
And a lot of travelling. North, south. There were times when you used to get in the car after 3 days in the field and you'd be playing the next day, but you'd have to travel 4 or 5 hours overnight to get to the venue and then turn up and go out and play. I'm amazed that there weren't more accidents on the roads that involved county cricketers, but fortunately we got through without too many issues.
Well, listen, you mentioned one of the, if I might be fair to him, one of the non-superstars in that team, but very much a component in that great and championship-winning team of 1987. I'm delighted to say that he was your teammate there, and he's the current Notts coach, of course, Mick Newell. Hello, Mick.
Hello, chaps. All right?
Very, very good indeed. What are your memories of that great team that won the championship in '87? And if you want to include Chris Broad's contribution, I'll happily accept that.
Yeah, well, it was funny. It just made me think back there. Some of the big name players, like Chris said, we had an awful lot of international cricketers in our dressing room.
You had a pretty good seam bowling attack, it's fair to say, as well.
We had a great seam bowling attack. I think I used to stand at short leg to Richard Hadley, Clive Rice, Mike Kendrick, like you say, and then Eddie Hemmings as well as a spin bowler. So you're always in the game at short leg. And different times in the fact that people like Chris and Tim and that would go off to a test match and then return from a test match and play a county game straight away. So, we saw a lot more of our international cricketers than we do nowadays. And I think that must have been quite tough for them playing county cricket on the back of a hard test match.
Actually, I think you're probably right, Mickey. I mean, you didn't realise it at the time, but when you've been in front of a number of people supporting England at Lord's or Old Trafford or Headingley, and then you come back, and the great thing about Trent Bridge was that actually, whether it was empty or whether it was full, it was a terrific place to play. But some of the lesser grounds, to come back from a test match and play in front of two men and their dogs, was a bit difficult from time to time. But we had to do it. That was the job. And you had to get on and do it. And when you're playing with a team that involved Clive Rice and Richard Hadley, who were desperate to win on most occasions, then you also felt that you had to raise your game to come back and do it as well.
Mick, tell us about Chris as a batsman, because we haven't yet discussed what kind of player he was and how he was forcing his way into the England team.
Fluent on the offside, Mick. Don't forget, fluent on the offside.
Chris was a terrific opening batsman. I mean, he took a challenge on by coming to Trent Bridge, which was a bowler-friendly ground at the time, as you mentioned, with Rice and Hadley having pitches prepared to suit them. So, Chris took on a huge challenge coming here to open the batting. I think it probably helped him play for England quicker than he might otherwise have done if he would have done it all. So credit to him for that. And he used to churn out the runs for us in county cricket, and that's what got him the opportunity to play internationally.
The cliche now, of course, that now he's a highly respected referee of the game, an arbiter of all...
Stop laughing, will you? Stop laughing.
An arbiter of all disputes, Mick. The cliche is, and I'm sure it's not true, is that Chris was, how can I put it, a bit hot-tempered. What's your view on that?
Oh, well, yes, we had our moments. I mean, not particularly me in direction at me.
No.
It was a fairly fiery dressing room with Rice and Hadley in it, and Hemmings, who never short of an opinion. So, Chris added to that. I don't think it was the most harmonious dressing room that's ever existed at Trent Bridge, but it was certainly one of the most successful. And Clive Rice, as Chris mentioned, had a way of galvanising players to want to play better for him and for the club.
We're going to talk later on and very soon about Chris's Test career. I'm going to ask you a straightforward question, Mick. Now, in all seriousness, do you think this fella played enough for England?
I think he would have played more probably in the modern era where chopping and changing of the team hasn't come about as much. England very much stick with their players now. So, Chris would know far better than I how many games he played and when he was replaced and who replaced him. But I think in this modern era, somebody who was scoring runs as heavily as he was at the time would have played more test matches because England would have stuck with players for longer.
Well, Mick, it's been a treat to talk to you and just to get some brief memories of that great Nottinghamshire team of the mid-'80s. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem. Anytime.
Cheers, Mick.
Mick Newell, still very much, of course, involved with Nottinghamshire to this day. In fact, we'll talk then about the chopping and changing that he talked about there. Meant that you played those couple of tests against the West Indies, then a one-off test against Sri Lanka. I think that's fair to say. You made 86, so you were establishing yourself in the team. But then you didn't go for the Ashes series of 85. Is that right?
Well, it was India that winter.
Yeah.
And I would... apparently was told by Alan Lee, who was then the Times journalist, that at a reception on the Saturday night, that I'd batted myself out of going to India because I'd batted so slowly. We had Chris Tavare and I had a really dodgy middle session in the play. Even though I'd scored 86, it was clear that I wasn't fluent in playing spin bowling, and I was really upset by it.
To be fair, Chris, if you can't look fluent when you're batting with Tavare, you really must have been having an off day.
But, to be told by a journalist that I'd batted myself out of it, I was a little upset, but sure enough, it proved to be right, that I didn't then go to India, and I was out of the team for 2 years until I got selected to go to Australia in '86.
Who were the openers that you were competing with at that time in and around the England team?
Well, Tim Robinson was one.
Your teammate at Nottinghamshire.
Martin Moxon was another. Bill Athy was on the scene. He'd played, but it wasn't really. Graham Gooch, of course, was in and around the setup. Wilf Slag was another one who was being talked about. So there were a number of openers around at the time.
So
Graham Fowler, of course. How can I forget Graham Fowler?
Graham, absolutely. So eventually you are picked then, and I'm building up something here. You're picked for the Ashes series in Australia that covers 86 and 87. What do you remember about the build-up to that, and what were your hopes for that series?
I think everyone at the end, coming towards the end of a season, everyone picks their touring team, and an awful lot of people were picking me to be part of that touring team, and I passed a couple of touring teams by which I felt I had a chance of getting on. So
you were
I
scoring a lot of runs at this time.
Yeah.
Weren't you?
And I was feeling in good nick, and 86 was a good year for me at Notts, and I wanted to go. Of course I did. So I wasn't building up too many hopes after the disappointment of 84. But then to hear my name mentioned in the squad was just a massive, massive boost. And I remember turning up, taking it on a couple of weeks, turning up to the hotel to go to Australia, and there was Ian Botham and Phil de Freitas and Mike Gatting and Alan Lamb and all these sort of people, and Eric Clapton. And it's like, was he in the team?
I missed that meeting.
I'm sure I didn't have Eric Clapton down in my team, but there he was, and he'd come to wish the boys well, and obviously knew both of them quite well, rock and roll cricketer. And that was the start of our trip to Australia. Throughout our trip to Australia, we had Genesis were over there. Elton John was following us around. Phil Collins was over there. It was just amazing. It was a real rock and roll tour.
Chris, what happens next? What we're going to talk about in this section of the show. England against Australia for the Ashes, as we know, coming up over the next 12. It's really a year of it coming up now. 10 successive tests is one of the great sporting arenas, and it's there that legends are made. And what happened to you, or to put it more positively, what you did over those next 3 months in Australia, has you down in my world as a legend, because it was just an incredible series for you. I suppose we'll start chronologically, if you like. What do you remember about the November 86, the first test in Brisbane? You got into the team, obviously, and off you go from there.
Yeah, I mean, it was... I remember the first month of the tour not being terribly successful for the England team because there was... no one was scoring runs, no one was really taking wickets. We didn't start auspiciously, and Martin Johnson from The Independent then wrote just prior to the start of the test match that England can't bat, they can't bowl, and they can't field.
One of the most famous pieces of cricket writing of all time, and I suppose that poor man has been forced to eat those words.
Yeah, time
he must
and time
be sick
again.
of that diet, mustn't he?
Yeah, that's right. But most of the senior players had been to Australia before, and they knew the warm-ups were just that.
I'm just looking at the names below your own here in the batting lineup. I'm looking at the names of Gatting, Lamb, Gower, Botham. These are not legendary preparers. These are legendary players, aren't they?
Exactly. And I think they enjoyed the social side of Australia much more in the first month of the tour than the cricketing side. So when Ian Botham stood up at the pre-match dinner that we always had before a test match, and he said, if any of you bleeps, walk when you're in this test match, you'll have me to answer to. You then knew that it was serious. This is a serious game of cricket. And of course he then went out and scored 135 in the first innings and smashed the Australians all round the park. And Edmonds and Embury picked up wickets in the second innings. There was also a rest day, which fell so well for us because we'd been in the field for a day and a bit maybe, and then there came a rest day, so we recharged the batteries, came back, and we bowled them out on the following day. So it just worked perfectly for us, and we ended up not having a very auspicious start to the tour, but then winning the first Test match. And when you're 1-0 up after one Test match, you're in a very, very strong position.
Yeah, you opened with Bill Athey, the Yorkshireman. You made 8 and 35 not out. I also will tell you that in the middle of all this, you did make your one-day debut for England, but we'll come back to that in just a little while, because it's in the second, third and fourth Tests that you come into your own. And as I said, I mentioned the names of Hobbs and Hammond there. You've established a place for yourself in the pantheon of English cricket by scoring centuries in all 3 of those games. I remember it was the first series I think the BBC ever showed any live coverage of. So I can remember being square-eyed up all night watching. Yes. Well, what I seemed to watch all through the winter was you batting, if I'm absolutely truthful. Talking about Perth, of course, the Western Australia, the WACA, bouncy pitch, 162 for you as England make 592. Count those.
Yeah, listen, we won the toss and it was a belter. Bill Athey and I put on, I think, 223 for the first wicket. And Bill, unfortunately, got out for 96, I believe, something like that. But I remember being 140-odd not out overnight and coming back the next morning and not being able to play anywhere like the way that I played the previous day.
Cricket's weird, isn't it?
All sport is weird. You look at a golfer. A golfer can come out and play beautifully and get 6 or 7 under par one day and then really struggle the next day, struggle with his swing and all the rest of it. So, that taught me a lesson that actually start each day as though you're on naught.
Can you remember getting to your 100?
I do remember getting to my 100, and Greg Matthews was the bowler, off spinner, and he bowled me one on leg stump, a half volley, and I worked it around to square leg, and I remember almost getting down to the bowler's end and saying thanks, mate, and then running back and taking the 2 to celebrate the 100.
Well, the leg stump half volley to get your Test century against Australia
couldn't have been a better ball, could it?
The cricket, the Christmas Test isn't for another 2 months. That was very good of him, wasn't it? England drew that game, and I don't know whether you, as you say, one day you're great, and the next day things don't quite click for you. So I can't call this a supernatural run of form, but your good form continues with a third Test in Adelaide, where again in the first innings you make another 100, 116. What are your recollection of that game?
Well, I remember Mike Atting and I put together quite a lengthy partnership. He went on to get 100 and I went on to get 100. I remember, strangely, bizarrely, I remember a pain in my foot. We had these real thin-soled Nike shoes that were given to us before we went on tour. Very comfortably generally, but then you come and play on really hard Australian pitches, and I liked batting in studs. I know an awful lot of people from Australia bat in flats, but I liked batting in studs, so that it gave me grip when I was running to and from each end. And I remember the stud just playing up with my foot, and but it obviously didn't affect my form. And Merv Hughes bowled me a bouncer, and I remember Greg Ritchie from mid-on. It actually sat me on my bum. Greg Ritchie from mid-on shouted, smell the leather there, son, all that sort of stuff. And
original,
he got a telling off from Alan Border. Excuse me. After the day, because I'd ended up getting 100, and he said, "Whatever you do, don't say anything to Chris Broad again, because it clearly fired him up. He's now got another bloody 100."
The match ended in a draw, which takes us on to Melbourne. To me, one of the great sporting events anywhere in the world, anytime. When England play Australia, they always start it on Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day, or it's Boxing Day. Boxing Day, yeah. So it's Christmas Day here for us when the first ball is bowled. Yep. I'm usually sat full of turkey and advocaat, and then England lose the toss and all the rest of it. 100,000 people, and England win the Test by an innings. They slap Australia in the Boxing Day Test, and you, in the only innings we had, get another 100, a third successive 100 in Ashes Test matches. I mean, they don't write. This is a boy's own story. This is beyond Roy of the Rovers, isn't it?
Well, we put them in and bowled them out very cheaply, and I think I was on about 50 odd overnight, and went out the following day and completed this 100. I had no knowledge of records or anything of that sort. But then to be told that I was linked with Hobbs and Hammond, who are two absolute legends of the game,
Well, bestride it, yeah.
was astonishing. But I was just doing my job. I was an opening batsman out there playing for England. My job was to see off the new ball and get as many runs as possible. But I do recall in that particular innings being in the 90s and being so much more nervous for that 100 than I was the previous two. And fortunately, I managed to scamper a single when I was on 99 to get to 100. And, the whole place erupted. Even though it was the second day and Australia weren't doing very well, there was still an extremely good crowd in there, and the whole place erupted. It was fantastic.
You talked about Alan Boulder telling his fellow Australians not to fire you up. But when you've scored that kind of runs against Australia, we all know how competitive they are at sport. Hopefully not too competitive this summer. Yes. What was their response to you? I mean, when you beat up an Australian team, I don't know whether they'll be shouting at you and hoping that you're going to fall down in front of them, or whether they say, "Well done, mate."
Actually, I remember a comment from John Edridge, great Surrey and England batsman, before I went to Australia, and he said to me, "Go out and enjoy yourself. Go out and get the Australians on your side. They appreciate good cricket." And that's as I found it, to be honest. Yes, there was a bit of abuse and verbals from the players themselves, but I never let it affect me. I was never one to react to what a bowler or a fielder said. I just put my head down and got on with it. But the crowds, when you'd scored runs, they were very appreciative. They would always clap you in. If they got the chance, slap you on the back saying, "Well done, mate," and all this sort of stuff. And lots of them, when you're in hotels and what have you, would want to buy you beers and celebrate your success with themselves. So it was actually a really sound piece of advice that John Edridge gave me, which came true.
England, of course, won that as well to put themselves 2-1 ahead. You lost, as traditional in those days, lost the last test.
Yeah, the dead rubber, yes.
I presume a certain amount of cold drinks had been taken prior to the match. I'm just guessing. And you find yourself at the end of 87 International Cricketer of the Year. Given that you couldn't get into the England team 18 months before that must have been very satisfying.
It was amazing. Richard Hadley had played in Australia the previous year, and he was international cricketer that year. And so I, a fellow Notts cricketer, had followed him in that footsteps, in those footsteps. So it was a tremendously proud moment. And I remember even before it being announced, Graham Morris, who was a photographer of some repute, follows the England setup around while I was playing, is still doing it now. He said to me, "I need a photograph of you down with the car," because there was this Alfa Romeo as the prize at the MCG, and it hadn't been announced yet. And I said, "Well, I'm not sure I can do this." "Yes, you can. You're fine. Yeah, come on, just help me out here." So we went down and we had this photograph taken with me just dangling a set of car keys sitting on the bonnet of this car. He wanted the scoop, so he probably owes me a pint or two, actually, which I'm not sure he's paid. But anyway, that's fine.
Talk about contrast. That triumphant tour of Australia is followed later on, 87, by the tour of Pakistan, a tour in which we all remember Mike Gatting, international incident, government's been called in when he rowed with Shakir Rana. But you'd already, prior to that, this was a test series played out in not great spirit, I think it's fair to say. And of course, everyone remembers the first test controversy where, how can I put it, you got out and you didn't walk, and you stood there even when you were given out, in a way that I don't suppose you'd approve of these days with your current employment. People were... it really was a big deal. You stood there for nearly half a minute before Graham. I think Graham Gooch eventually kind of advised you that it might be best to leave the arena.
22 seconds.
Oh, you've timed it, have you? Okay.
Well, I was told it was 22 seconds.
Okay.
But it stemmed from...
It's a lifetime, isn't it?
It is, actually. If you just look at your watch for 22 seconds, it is a long time, yes. But it stemmed from Pakistan toured England 6 months previously.
Yes.
And they weren't happy with some of the umpiring that was going on. And I remember...
This was the days when we still had home umpires?
Yes.
Or was it? Yeah, it was both home umpires.
And I remember the Pakistanis saying in a press conference at the end of the tour, aside from thank you and all the rest of it, wait till you come to Pakistan and you have our umpires to face. So I think, and Imran Khan had announced his retirement from Test cricket. So Javed Miandad was going to take over the captaincy.
An entirely different character.
Entirely different. So we got to Pakistan, and we knew it was after the World Cup, so we'd played successfully in the World Cup, went back to tour Pakistan, won the one-day series 3-0, so we were still in very good spirits. Come to the first Test match, completely different. The umpires were very much in favour of the Pakistanis. I remember Abdul Qadir bowling, getting Mike Gatting out, LBW, but bowling what he called a flipper, running down, appealing to the umpire, saying, "It's a flipper, it's a flipper," and the umpire giving him out. And then I was, as you rightly say, I was given out, caught behind when I hadn't hit the ball. And I just said, no, this is just not right. I'm sorry, I'm not going for it. Until Graham Gooch came down and said, "Oh, Broady, I think you better go, mate." So we went off for tea, and
that's my favourite ever impression of Graham Gooch.
and we ended up, in fact, losing that Test match 1-0. But we had a real chance of levelling it in the second Test match, which is when the Shakur Rana and Mike Gatting thing happened.
Well, listen, that's one of the things we'll come on to in the second hour of My Sporting Life, Shakur Rana and all that, as it's known. You played in two of the most amazing series ever for England, the big win down under against Australia, and then the follow-up against Pakistan, which could not have been a less happy tour in many, many ways. We've heard about your own problems in one of the tests, and of course that was followed by the incident between Mike Gatting and Shakur Rana, which, quite apart from its cricketing ramifications, soured international relations. What do you remember about that game?
I remember it knocking off the rest of the world news on BBC's headlines. We were number one story in the BBC's 9 o'clock news then. I remember the match starting reasonably well, the pitch looking as though it was a result pitch, which was surprising after Pakistan won the first Test match. We thought it was just going to be a very, very bland surface for us to play on. We won the toss, we batted. I managed to get 100, or trying to knock back all these critics of my not
all
being
forgotten
able to
in the
play
midst
spin.
of time now,
Well,
that, of course.
Man of the match I was.
Yeah.
I went up to collect the Man of the Match award in a match that really only lasted 2.5 days. Yeah, and then, of course, the famous incident with Mike and Shakur Rana. But we had them 5 down, chasing another wicket before the close of play on the end of the second day. And we brought the field up to save Salim Malik from getting down to the other end to play out the last over. We wanted another over at the night watchman. And David Capel had come in from deep square leg to square leg. And Mike, who was just fielding behind the batsman on the square leg side and had told the batsman that he was bringing the square leg up, had just seen that he'd come in too far and just held his hand out. The palm of his hand was to the fielder to say, basically, don't come in any further. You're too close. And Shakur Rana at square leg saw Mike do this. And most notably for me, although it wasn't shown very often, was a picture from the square leg camera where he'd looked at his watch. After seeing this, he'd looked at his watch and seen that there was only 2 or 3 minutes left. So he then walked up and said, whoa, you can't do this, you can't do this. And he then mentioned the word cheat. And of course, it was a very volatile situation, quite hectic. And as soon as someone calls Mike a cheat, he's instantly going to react. So he came back and said, no, you're a cheat. And anyway, we didn't get that last over in. We came off the field and
the world goes nuts over that photograph of finger pointing between the two of them, taken by the self-same Graham Morris, the only person who got that picture, has made his career, and you should say he's still working off of it today. Brilliant photographer, of course, there is that. Let's say we can catch up now by being joined by former England captain, of course, and former person in that seat where you'll sit now, Chris, Mike Gatting. Hello, Mike.
Hi, how you doing?
Very, very good. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Actually, I don't want to talk to you about Shakur Rana and all that, Mike, because, frankly, you've come in here and given us chapter and verse on it. What we need to do is talk about that stunning time when, it was a brief time, I think it's fair to say, but where Chris Broad was just batting people to pieces for the England team. Talk about his contribution to particularly that tour of Australia.
And I'm listening as well.
Yeah. He's listening. He's making notes. He's taking notes.
No, look, we when people sort of looked at who we were picking when we went out on the trip, and it was quite interesting that Mickey Stewart, who was the team coach, and myself sat down and picked the team. There was only probably one problem, and Broady wasn't it. So, Mickey Stewart had come in and said, yeah, Chris Broad, definitely good thing, plays quick bowling well, exactly the sort of person we need. And, Middlesex have already respected Chris for the way he used to play Wayne Daniel and people like that. So it was only when the slower medium pacers come on he struggled a bit. But I mean, anyway, he started off a bit slowly, but like all of us.
Mike, you ought to be very careful about going on about people's record against slow bowling. I just pointed out to Chris that when your name comes up on the computer in front of me, it just says Mike Gatting, ball of the century.
Yeah, I know. We mustn't talk about that again. We've done that to death in the last 3 weeks. Anyway,
you must be pale from talking about it, Mike.
Oh, we are. We've been very pale talking about it. It's been one of those. One of June the 3rd. It's always there. June the 3rd, 1993, and it comes up moving swiftly on.
Happy anniversary, Mike.
Broady wants to talk about. He likes to hear how well he played, but he did. He played awfully well. And actually, the other part of the partnership that didn't get mentioned a lot during that trip was Bill Athy.
Yes.
And they both really played exceptionally well. One left, one right. Both played differently, and they really gave us some great starts. And the nice thing about Jess was that he just wanted to bat all day, and once he got in the groove and he got his confidence up, and that he just carried on, and he didn't care about anything else. Just wanted to bat. He loved batting, and it was just ideal for us. And going from sort of Perth, getting 100, then on to Adelaide, and then on to the most important one really on not so good sort of good pitch. And if you talk about the best 100, that was without doubt the best 100 at I think anyway at Melbourne, where the wicket was slightly more helpful to the bowlers because Adelaide was quite flat and Perth was an absolute belter of a wicket. But they had some really good bowlers, and being a left-hander, we probably negated one of them in Bruce Reid, and for me he was their bowler of the series, and they had another young people charging in like Merv Hughes and Craig McDermott and Jeff Lawson, one or two others, and they had some left armers because they thought we were weak against them. But Chris played against them all. He got in there and he made a huge contribution, which enabled us to have the runs on the board to attack and bowl them out with our two spinners and our seam attack.
Mike, it's always good to talk to you, and I promise from the bottom of my heart that next time you come on, we'll talk more about the thousands of runs you made for England and the tons of centuries you made as well, and never mention S. Warne Esquire again. How about that?
Oh, he wasn't a bad bloke. Wasn't a bad bowler either.
Okay, listen, that's the great Mike Gatting. Just reiterating what we know about that brilliant series that Chris Broad had then. The Pakistan series, though, it all goes down into history and all the rest of it. And extraordinarily, I mean, you could argue that you're already heading out of the England team because you didn't play that many more games, did you?
No, we came back from that tour, and I think it was West Indies were the next opposition in England.
88, yeah.
And
you didn't lose all 5 tests, the England team, and I think you only played a couple, didn't you?
That's right.
In a 4-0 defeat. I mean, of course,
that was the year that they went through 5 different captains, I think, after Mike had a little bit of an indiscretion in Nottingham. And then was sacked from the captaincy, and we went through 5 different captains of the series, which was clearly.
Can you remember who they were? Can you help me with that?
They were
Gatting,
Embury.
Yes.
Was next. Cowdrey was next.
Chris Cowdrey had one cap as captain. Yeah.
Gooch was next, and I think Pringle took over from Gooch.
Extraordinary.
So
I mean,
it was an extraordinary.
To be fair, that was the panic that West Indian team had put through world cricket, wasn't it?
And our selectors, we were still in that mode of if you don't perform in 1 or 2 Test matches, then you're out, and we must have gone through. I think it was somewhere in the region of 34 players in that particular series, which is an extraordinary number of players to come and to be asked to come and play for England. And clearly we lost that series, and I got left out, and then didn't go on a winter tour, then came back in the following summer for 2 matches against Australia, and then that was the end of my career.
25 tests, 6 centuries. That's pretty good going, I would say, because it take you 5 or 6 tests to get going. All of them overseas, oddly enough. I asked earlier on one of our guests, the question whether you'd played enough Test cricket. I think it was Mike Newell. I'll answer my own question. You didn't, but that was as much to do with the way the team was being picked, as you've just mentioned, and it doesn't matter now, it's all a quarter of a century ago, rather than anything to do with your talent, because I think in the modern game, without having to blow smoke screens in your general direction, you would have had 50 or 60 caps, wouldn't you?
Well, I was frustrated, of course, by not being able to settle into a regular spot, particularly after performances overseas. But you come back and I wouldn't score enough runs in England, and of course that's just the nature of the beast. I think had we had a setup like we have today, when I was playing back in the 80s, and you had coaches around who would take you aside, show you videos, try and work with you and improve your game, then I think I would have played a lot more international matches. But there wasn't that regime at that time, and you were very much left to seeking out your own mentors and finding out how to play in certain situations, and that was difficult to do for me, I found. So I kind of floundered on home pitches, but enjoyed my time when I played overseas, and it reflected in the scores that I got.
Well, as I say, I don't think you played enough for England, but if I might quote from the closing scene of Casablanca, Chris, you'll always have Australia. You'll always have Australia. And having gone back to your native county, Gloucestershire, for a short while, a hip injury forces your retirement in 1994 from first-class cricket. So let's fast forward then from your retirement as a first-class cricketer to 10 years later, roughly 9 years later. We'll ignore the fact you were bringing up future generations of England cricketers and things like that. And in 2003, you become an ICC Test official. Now, I described this on Twitter this morning. I was saying how excited I was to meet you as poacher turned gamekeeper. But let's ignore that because it is a bit of a cliche. Let's talk about. Just tell me what an ICC official, the match referees do.
Well, a match referee is, in its simplest form, we are ICC's representative at each and every international match. The ICC is based in Dubai. It was based in London, but it's now based in Dubai. And obviously there's a time difference between Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere. So they obviously can't be awake all the time to answer any issues that crop up during international matches. So we are employed to be at those venues and answer any issues that come up and keep the game moving forward.
So you've got the umpires, the on-field umpires. These days we have a third umpire looking at...
and a fourth umpire.
Indeed. And so some of them are looking at the technology. That's not your job. Your job is in case there is a dispute and indeed when players kick their stumps over and things like that, you might be forced to come down and say that's not such a great idea.
The umpires look after the game. They administer the game and make sure the game works. My role is basically to check that all the facilities are up to speed, that when we go to the ground, the pitch looks okay, the outfield looks okay. Any player in discipline during the game, I'm there to be able to answer any issues there or anything else that crops up during the game. And then at the end of the game, I write a report on how the test match has gone, how the officials have done, and hand it back to the ICC.
Do you mind me asking how you got that job? I don't suppose they advertise it in the Evening Standard, do they?
A chap called Alan Fordham from the ECB phoned me up in 2001 or 2 maybe, and said, ICC are looking for some new match referees. Do you fancy being one? So I had no idea what an ICC match official was, and I said, yep, that'd be great. Would you come down for an interview? So I came down to Lord's for an interview with Malcolm Speed and Sunil Gavaskar, who were chief executive and chairman of cricket at that particular time. Didn't know what they were going to ask me. As I said, didn't know what the job was. And they said, what do you think? So I gave us kind of version of being like a father of a head of a family type thing. They clearly liked what they heard. Didn't initially get me on the full panel, but offered me a reserve panel. So I got the uniform, I got the jacket, I got the trousers, the shirt, the tie, all this sort of stuff. And that sat in the closet for about 18 months until they gave me a job down in New Zealand. New Zealand versus Pakistan was my first job.
And of course, it means that you now follow the sun and you're doing these tests all over the world, which is great for you because you still love the cricket, everything to do with the game.
Love it.
And it's a dream job, therefore. And hopefully most of you just have to write at the end of it, lovely test match, everyone played in good spirit and the umpires were fantastic. But it doesn't always turn out like that. And of course, In 2009, and what is it with you and Pakistan, Chris? In 2009, I mean, we're laughing about it now, but of course you were part of the most horrible thing that's ever happened in cricket when the Sri Lankan team bus, and you were with the officials in the car behind it, was attacked by terrorists in Pakistan. Tell us about that day.
Yeah, I mean, the first 2 days had gone without incident. The pitch was very flat. The security was very good. We were going in convoy to the ground, the two buses and the match officials' bus, plus police escorts and what have you. And we'd got into the ground and everything was fine. This third morning, not unusually, the batting side decided that they would just hang back a little bit because they didn't have to go out and do a lot of fielding practice and what have you. So the Sri Lankan team bus and the match officials' bus set off with this police convoy, and the Pakistan bus was maybe 5 or 10 minutes behind. So we got to the Liberty roundabout, which is about half a mile away from the ground, and everything slowed down and all the traffic was stopped at the roundabout. There were police at every junction, and then all of a sudden there was a popping sound. And not being from a country that carries guns or fires guns very, very often in the street, I had no idea what was going on. But the third umpire, who was sat next to me, Ahsan Raza, said, "Get on the floor of the bus." So, we'd come to a halt. The Sri Lankan bus had stopped. We'd come to a halt behind the bus, alongside an ambulance, and we were told to get on the floor of the bus. For the next 10, 12 minutes, I was unaware of anything going on, aside from I was aware that our driver was shot. I was aware of bullets flying around because the bus was being hit on a number of occasions. And then, halfway into it, I was aware that Ahsan Raza had been hit because he was obviously moaning and he was praying to his God. And I saw all this blood. It was the most amazing amount of blood. And I just, having seen lots of films where, someone comes up and puts pressure on a wound, I automatically just, up against him, I put my hand on his back and tried to stop this blood from...
You could see where the blood was coming from,
yeah, from the middle of his back. So I put my hand on that and tried to stem the flow of blood. But the attack continued. So I was unaware of anything that was going on at the time because we were obviously below window level and didn't know what was going on. But once Ahsan had been hit, we were more aware that this was quite serious. All of a sudden, the sliding side door of the van opened, and there's this chap with a BlackBerry in a black uniform with a handgun in his hand, looking at us. And I thought at that time, oh my God, this is it. We're all going to go. But he jumped in. He was a member of the security forces.
You had no way of knowing that?
No idea.
No.
He jumped into the bus, closed the door behind him, and took refuge. So I tried to shout to him, say, "Come on, we got to get out of here. Get in," because I knew the driver was dead. Get into the van and drive. Get into the front seat and drive us out of here. And he didn't speak English terribly well, so he kept saying, "I can't drive. I can't drive." So I was saying, "Get in the van, just get us out of here." Eventually, things quieted down, and another of these police officers in black came to the driver's door, unceremoniously grabbed the driver, slung him out of the door onto the concrete, onto the tarmac, got into the driver's seat and drove us to the ground. So we got to the ground, and then there was all these police around with their machine guns and what have you. I mean, it was just mind-blowing what was happening. So the door opened again. Everyone out. So they dragged poor Ahsan, again, unceremoniously out of the van onto the dusty street and, put him there. And so I'm then out next. And then the rest of the guys, Simon Towfel, Steve Davis, Peter Manuel, all these guys get out of the bus. And we're just told, get in the ground, go in the ground straight away. So clearly we ran into the ground, into the umpire's room, and as soon as we reached the sanctuary of the umpire's room, we all took stock. It was like, wow, what happened there? That was ridiculous. So being the match referee, I have a local phone, So I thought, well, I better just find out what's going on. So I told the umpires to stay in the room, and this was after we'd all had a group hug, and a few tears were we all had our moment of emotion. I went to the players' area to find out what was going on, and sure enough, there was Sri Lankan players there, and I found out that one or two of them had been hit by shrapnel, and one in particular was quite seriously hurt, and there were others that were being patched up, and then saw the reality of what went on, but then heard that they'd actually got out. So came back, spoke to the umpires, had the phone. I phoned my kids. Stuart was in the West Indies with England at the time. Gemma, my daughter, was in Australia with the Women's World Cup at the time.
With the cricket as well, doesn't she?
Yeah. And so they were aware of the situation. I then handed the phone to all the other umpires. They then phoned their partners. And it wasn't for about 3 or 4 hours before it was, because it was 9 o'clock in the morning Pakistan time, which was about 4 o'clock in the morning UK time. So as far as UK people, they wouldn't have woken up and seen it until another 3 or 4 hours later. So it then hit the news. So I wanted to make sure that everyone knew at home what was going on, and that most of us were safe.
Hassan Raza
was hit twice. He had probably 3 weeks in hospital, but came out and has made probably a 99% recovery. I mean, he's absolutely fine, but there is a certain section of his midriff that has no feeling in it. So obviously one of the bullets has cut some nerves somewhere, and he doesn't have feeling in his midriff.
Do you think you contributed to him still being alive?
Did
Do you
I?
think you contributed? Yeah.
Listen, I don't know. Is the simple answer. I'm not a medical man. I just automatically did what I thought was right, and I hope so.
Yeah.
Because he's there, because he's still alive and he's still umpiring. So I hope it had an effect. But he made it through, and I have worked with him since, and it's great to see him doing so well. But there are still issues in Pakistan, which is why international cricket is not being played there.
And why I guess, having heard that, and thank you, that was spellbinding, you won't be going back to Pakistan anytime soon.
It's not on my holiday list, no.
Another aspect of your life more recently that's been well recorded, but I think we have to talk about here, is the fact that your wife, Michelle, a few years ago, had a terrible disease and eventually committed suicide. I think we should start with the positive side of this first, because, of course, there's a lovely part of this story in that two of you find each other in middle age. It's a middle-aged romance, isn't it?
Yeah, I left my initial relationship with my first wife. And then, yes, I mean, Misha and I found ourselves at a golf event, funnily enough. She worked for the European Golf Tour, and I was
She's a golf promoter, isn't she?
Keen golfer myself. So we met there and started a relationship in 2000. So we had, 10 years together.
Yeah.
But she was in Australia on another golfing event when she noticed that she was slurring her words, or someone noticed for her that she was slurring her words. Now, Mish liked a glass of wine like everyone else, but she'd only had one glass of wine on this occasion, so couldn't understand why she wasn't able to speak normally. She went to a doctor in Australia, who then sent her on to a specialist in Australia, who I asked after Misha died, and I'd seen him in Perth after she died, and said, "Did you know then that it was motor neurone disease?" And he said, "Yes, I thought it was." But Mish was sent to Professor Pam Shaw at Sheffield University Hospital for a proper diagnosis, and she was diagnosed in 2009 with having motor neurone disease.
And that's, you probably know the exact terms. It's one of those diseases that attacks the nervous system, and you lose movement, and Well, I think the mind remains.
The mind and some of your internal organs remain in perfect working order, but unfortunately the body just shuts down, and so you become, in Misha's words, you become a blob, and that's something that she didn't want to become, which is why in the end she ended up taking her own life.
How quickly does this condition take
Well,
over?
it varies. I was with an MND sufferer today who was diagnosed in 2006, and she is still living and has a certain range of movement even to this day. So it's 7 years on. But on average, with the diagnosis that Mish had, you generally last between 14 and 16 months after diagnosis. So it's quite a quick, and it's incurable. There is no cure for motor neuron disease. So if you have motor neuron disease, it is a death sentence. So when the professor said after diagnosis, don't, whatever you do, go and look on the internet and find all about it. Of course, what do? You go and look on the
You're
internet.
You're a human being.
Absolutely. So we knew pretty early on what the prognosis was from this diagnosis. And Mish had a bucket list. And so we tried to do things that she wanted to do.
Can you tell us any of the things were on the list?
Well, one of the things was to go to Alaska and see the whales. And we booked to go on a cruise with some friends of ours to go and see the whales and the brown bears and the glaciers. Oh, my word. It was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
I suppose I don't want to be a romantic novelist, but I guess the experience heightened by the fact that you knew this would be something you'd do together and maybe not have the chance to do again.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I remember on one occasion, Mish actually caught a pneumonia on the flight over, so she wasn't at her peak. But I remember seeing one of the whales. We'd seen a number of the whales come out breach, so come out of the water and slam down.
That amazing thing they can do.
Astonishing. But we had quite a big cabin window, and just at the time when I was in the cabin with Mish, this whale breached just outside of our window. So whether it was someone upstairs saying, "You haven't had the greatest trip in the world, but here's one especially for you," I've no idea. But it just worked to perfection. So that was a memorable trip, and unfortunately she went downhill quite rapidly after that.
Now, clearly, she's a woman whose mind did deteriorate. She knows her own mind, and I know there are legal ramifications about helping people with suicide and all the rest of it. And so there was an inquiry, but I did read an interview with you where she clearly had decided she was going to take some tablets and end it, and you were in the house with her that evening.
Yeah, I mean, for a while, we didn't sleep in the same bedroom because she said she found my snoring kept her awake rather a lot. She didn't sleep very well, but my snoring kept her awake. So we'd slept in separate rooms for a little while, and I had no idea when she was going to take her own life.
You knew she was going to do it, though?
Yeah, right from the word go. In fact, she'd said that she was not going to see this disease out because she didn't want to be a burden to anyone else. She wanted to be in control for as long as possible. And I think that's a general consensus for motor neuron disease sufferers. They want to be in control, and when they lose control, they just feel completely helpless. So Mish was, at some stage, had told me that she would end it in her own way, but she wouldn't tell me how, and she certainly wouldn't tell me when.
Because she didn't want you to be involved, because there are legal ramifications in this country.
Absolutely. So when it happened, and obviously she went to hospital, and she was looked after by the people at Nottingham Queen's Medical Centre. She lasted for another 24 hours, and in any suspicious death, the police always have to find out what actually happened. And so, the fact that I wasn't in the room at the time when she took her own life, and she'd had a concoction of medicines that she injected into a tube which had been put into her stomach to feed her. So she was still just about strong enough to be able to push this through a syringe into the tube, into her stomach, and she passed away peacefully. because part of it was Valium. So clearly, she knocked herself out very quickly, and then the drugs then had an effect after 24 hours.
Did you find the inquiry afterwards? I know the police had to do that. Did you find that a very difficult experience?
The thing I found difficult was that Mish was very well organised, and she'd laid out bits of her jewellery and bits of clothing and what have you for various people, put notes on it, and so when she was taken away in the ambulance and I went with her, the police obviously asked me questions at the hospital, and I said, listen, go back to the house.
It was all clearly an act of free will, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So the police had to investigate. They went back to the house, and they actually took away these things in envelopes and what have you. And I found that disappointing, and upsetting, because Mish had set them out and she wanted these gifts to go to the various people, and I was quite happy to do that. But they explained that they obviously had to make sure they were what they were in these envelopes, so they'd x-rayed them and done everything else. And they let me have them back within 24 hours. So at least it was rectified fairly quickly. But it was a really sad day. But out of the sadness has come the Broad Appeal, which is
I'm sitting here watching you, where you've got a yellow and blue one of those wristbands on that says the Broad Appeal.
Yeah.
I also say, and I'll say this to you on air now because I said it to you privately, Stuart, your son, and we'll talk about in very positive circumstances in a little while, he's not, Mish is not his mum, and yet I see him doing work for the Broad Appeal. And sometimes when people tell he's a bit of a brat and things, when he gets his dander up playing cricket, I think, actually, when you look at the way he works with his dad in the Broad Appeal thing, you think, that boy's got some heart. This is not just some kid shouting, or some punk shouting at the umpire.
He was 14 when Mish and I got together. My daughter Gemma was 16, so very impressionable ages.
Could be very difficult for them as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mish was brilliant at being able to encompass them into her life, our life, as well as my ex-wife's life as well. So she was a magnificent human being from that point of view, and she made a massive impression on both Stuart and Gemma. So when she died, and in fact before she died, she wanted us to set up this appeal to help raise awareness about motor neuron disease and some funds at the same time.
And those are the twin aims of the
Absolutely.
appeal, yeah?
Awareness being the first one, but obviously, the fact that it's an incurable disease at the moment, researchers need funds as well. So we try and raise funds wherever possible to help with the research into motor neuron disease.
And that's an ongoing project, obviously.
And when it started, we said, let's do 2 years, see where we are. Don't want to put too much pressure on Stuart in particular, but Gemma, who also has a role in the cricketing world as well, and a busy life, as do I, it's difficult to know where it's going to go. So we've done 2 years, and what we've all said now is, let's keep it going as an ongoing thing. It's kind of grown legs. Other people are now organising events under the Broad Appeal banner, and that is great awareness. That is great for the fundraising. So the Broad Appeal continues to rock and roll, which is great fun.
And if people want to see what work you've already done, or want to see how to get involved, or just want to see what's happening,
well, we have a website, thebroadappeal.org. My daughter does a Twitter account, The Broad Appeal. So you can find out all the information that you wish to on the website or from the Twitter account. So, log on.
Broadappeal.org to see what some positive has come out of what was otherwise a difficult and harrowing time. And thank you very much for talking so clearly about that to us here, where you're listening to me, Danny Kelly, and more importantly, the voice and experiences of my guest tonight on My Sporting Life, Chris Broad. Chris, we must get on back to cricket matters if we can. And I know you like to have a bit of a knockabout fun about your son Stuart, England's one of England's two primary pace bowlers, and a batsman I think who could do a little bit better. But actually, because this is a programme of record, how proud are you to have your son come follow you into the England team? And let's be fair, he is a terrific cricketer.
Yeah, he is. And I mean, I talked about, when I first started playing and maybe not seeing too many barriers. It was just a relatively natural progression from club cricket to first class to test cricket almost. And I see exactly the same for him in that, I'm in a position where I can see some hurdles and particularly from opposition players, but he seems to be able to just swan over them so easily. And I don't really think he's had a massive dip in form. There was the time last winter when he got left out for the Indian Test series, but he had an injury in the first Test match.
Given those pictures, he was lucky to be left out, I think.
Well, yes, but he had an injury in the first Test match, and he was seriously ill, stomach problems before the start of the second Test match, and I don't think he should have played in either of those because he didn't do himself any favours. So when he got left out, I think it was the right thing to do, and of course he then got this injury with this fat pad,
this heel thing, virtually no one's ever heard of before.
I know. But fortunately,
for a man with no weight on him at all, the fat pad sounds a bit unfortunate injury to get, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. But for a bowler, of course, you're running in and pounding the foot down, every time you bowl.
And
so
he's a unit as well. He's clattering a fair amount of humanity down onto that heel, isn't he?
That's right. But he's found a way of getting over that, and it's now not an issue through an insert into his boot and also a new style of boot as well.
Was he a brilliantly talented cricketer as a young boy? Did you always know that, oh my God, he's got it?
I actually saw him at school. He went to Oakham School in Leicestershire or Rutland, should I say?
Mm-hmm.
And
you're better for the local.
Yeah, that's right. and he was a batsman. He was a batsman who bowled a bit. And I have to say, come 16, 17, I really didn't think that he was going to have the makings of a first-class player because he didn't score enough runs. He didn't have a great technique, but then he started to shoot up. He had, I think he shot up about 18 inches.
Well, you're a tall man, but he's a very tall chap.
In such a short space of time, and he enjoyed his bowling much more. He enjoyed hitting the deck. He enjoyed getting extra bounce out of the pitch, and Leicestershire, bless them, saw a future in him as a bowler. Signed him up as a bowler for their county. And he made his debut very quickly after signing for Leicestershire. And really from there, it was just a meteoric rise to get regularly into the first team, then have an opportunity in England's one-day side, and then get into the Test side. And as I say, he's not really looked back.
And I think he's a fantastic bowler, Stuart, but I do think he suffers in the shadow sometimes of Jimmy Anderson. But as I was reminding somebody here at TalkSport this very day, and yet another heated argument about cricket, yes, such things happen here. Jimmy Anderson wasn't the genius that he is now when he was Stuart's age.
Absolutely,
he's still got some learning to do.
Jimmy was inconsistent up until probably the age of 25, 26, yep. And then he realised, what his body can and can't do. Found a formula that worked for him and has continued with this formula for the last 5 or 6 years. And Stuart is going through that process at the moment, I think.
I don't think we'll talk about Stuart's batting because his job at the moment is to be a great bowler, and B, I get very irritated about it. I don't know whether I want him to slow down and become an all-round kind of blocker then hitter, or whether we ought to just go for every shot because he's clearly got some talent. We won't talk about that for now. We mentioned Anderson, we mentioned your son, and they, of course, will be the spearhead of what should be an astonishing years of cricket. 10 Test matches against Australia coming up in succession. I'm part of the media that's going at the moment, England are going to walk this, but there's, of course, always a part of me which knows you cannot underestimate Australian teams. But this is almost, in some ways, it'll be a defining time for the two of them as a bowling attack, because Jimmy will soon, in a couple of years' time, it'll leave Stuart and someone else to lead the attack. But these 10 games against Australia, let's say they play in 8 of them, because who knows what will happen. This is a defining moment, isn't it?
It is, and fitness will play an enormous role in the series from both sides, really, because when you're playing back-to-back Test matches, it takes its toll out on you.
Particularly if you're trying to bowl fast as well.
Absolutely. So you've got 2 Test matches at the start of this summer back-to-back, then there's a break, then there's 2 more, and then there's the final one at the Oval, and then, of course, you go to Australia very soon afterwards, and you play on their harder and faster pitches, and again, it's sort of back-to-back Test matches. So fitness is going to play an enormous part for both teams, but I think it's whoever starts the best will have the say in how the series goes of the two teams. And I think on paper, England are by far the strongest team, but never write off these Australians, particularly as they've now got an Australian fair dinkum Aussie coach who will try and inspire the Aussies within the team to perform like they're used to performing over the years.
And it would be unfair of me sitting in front of a former England opener not to mention Alistair Cook, because you did what you did, and we talked about the things you did down under, and I can think about, I'm old enough to remember Jeff Boycott just about opening for England, and you can think about Atherton and Gooch and all the rest of it. But Cook, it's modern game, and you can't compare era to era. He's blowing every record away, isn't he, as an England opener?
He is. He has an astonishing record as an England.
Is that because he's an astonishing player, or is there something else
listen,
going on?
I don't think you would pay money to go and see him bat, because he's not as stylish as, let's say, a David Gower. But he scores runs for fun. And as an opening batsman, that is your role. As a member of the opposition, you look at the opening batsman of that team and you see them scoring 100 after 100 after 100. It's just impossible to be able to break through to the middle order, which is where you're looking to pick up a few wickets and get into the team.
So far, touch wood, he looks like, and you probably have a bit more insight into this from inside the England camp than I do, it looks like the captaincy has not been a burden to him and the players have taken to him.
It seems to have spurred him on. He is scoring more runs now than he's ever scored before, and long may it continue as far as an England supporter is concerned.
And the downside of what you do for a living, which I know you love, is that you can't ever referee England, which means you're probably off working while Stuart's doing his thing and the team are doing their thing. How do you keep in touch? I mean, obviously you follow the cricket by electronic means. How often would you say you speak to Stuart when he's off doing his England thing?
Well, during the English summer, pretty frequently, because most of the cricket is played in the Northern Hemisphere during the English summer, so I then don't get appointments overseas.
Yeah.
So I'm around pretty much most of the English summer. As for the winter, I let him know a phone number that I have when I'm overseas. He does the same for me. So we do chat. We do text or chat from time to time, and just find out how each other are going. And it's, there is a good relationship there between father and son. Clearly, he is a very, very good player who has a massive future ahead of him. But he respects where he's come from, and he appreciates the form that I showed in my career as well. So.
And forgive me for saying it, because as I say, for every day that you did do something like bash your stumps over or not walked, I'm sure there were many, many days when you behaved perfectly correctly. There are times. Let's put it this way: of the current England team, if one of them is liable to kick up, it tends to be S. Broad, Esquire, doesn't it?
He is my son.
Yeah,
he is his father's
the
son.
apple has not fallen far from the tree.
No,
there,
that is true. That is true. Yeah.
And of course, as a match referee, you'd have to. It's just as well you can't do them there, because you'd have to tut it in, wouldn't you?
I enjoy a game that's got a bit of spice in it, and he is a character who provides a bit of spice, as the other members of the team do the same. A bland game of cricket for me is not an entertaining one. So let's have a little bit of character. Let's have a little bit of friction between the teams, between the individuals. I think that's great, as long as it doesn't go too far.
I guess it has been. We've heard ups and downs of quite extraordinary natures over the last couple of hours. We're talking about the sporting side of it. What's your favourite moment in cricket, do you think?
Listen, as a batsman, it's always scoring 100, and I think the ultimate is scoring 100 for England against Australia, and that happened in Perth in '86.
The first one?
Yeah, the first one. I mean, it was...
Got blasé when the next ones just kept coming and coming.
Yeah, but, it was a special moment to get selected in the first place.
Yep.
At Lord's as well. That is a wonderful place to play cricket. But I think, as a batsman, to get 100 playing for your country was amazing. I was disappointed I didn't score 100 in this country, but to have scored one in Perth in an Ashes series was for me probably the highlight.
You probably know the answer to this quiz question. Has anyone ever scored 6 centuries for England without scoring one of them on the home sod? I can't imagine they have.
Actually, I don't know the answer to that one, Danny, I'm afraid.
Well, it will be a very unusual. It's already a very unusual statistic. If someone's done more, then it will be a very, very unusual statistic. And outside of cricket, what are you most proud of?
Outside of cricket, well, my kids, I suppose. Any father who has a son and a daughter that have achieved what they've achieved in their sports to date, it's an astonishing thing, really. And I mean, the future looks bright for both of them. They are still very much enjoying what they're doing. still very much young enough to continue to be doing what they're doing for a number of years yet. So both of them make all of us in the Broad family very proud.
You're still a young man, and you're in a pretty good trim there, if you don't mind me saying. So hopefully there'll be decades ahead yet in the life, sporting and otherwise, of Chris Broad. Are you one of those people who looks to the future? Have you got ambitions? What do you hope for, if nothing else, for you and the people you love?
No, I don't really have a great deal of ambitions in life. I enjoy what I do as a match referee. I would like to continue doing that for as long as possible because I'm a great sports fan, cricket fan. And the job allows me to travel the world and to see people and to watch fantastic games. I just want to continue doing what I'm doing for as long as I can, really.